about the topic, the potential effects of the upcoming regulations. John.
Thank you, Luke. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm going to give a talk about the potential effects. I mean, we have an idea of where the recent documents are released, what they're endeavouring to try to proceed towards, but nothing is definite yet. So I'm going to share with you, from a notified body perspective, what these potential effects of the upcoming regulations may have and the implications accordingly. Some of the topics were discussed this morning by Rob and also by Stefan, so I'll try and go through the appropriate ones from a notified body perspective. It's what we feel may be lying ahead for us and for stakeholders for whom we see marked medical device technology. So basically, the medical device regulation, it does propose to provide more detail than the existing directive. So we feel it's a little bit more transparent and it's more user-friendly, I think, from a notified body perspective, in that there is more detail and it is more clear to interpret. Obviously, it involves the MDD and the IMDD combined. As I said, it's got rules which appear clearer. It involves harmonised implementation on designation. There's an extensive presence of how notified bodies should be audited, how they should be overseen, how they should be designated accordingly. It's endeavouring to create what's called a level playing field, where there are, as we know, concerns about inconsistencies in the activities of notified bodies. And there is reference to special notified bodies. Rob mentioned it this morning also, and it talks about this particular entity of notified bodies may be involved in particular high-risk medical devices. So this is the recommendation. It's not probably very legible there, but again, this is with regard to the audits and assessments performed by notified bodies in the field of medical devices. Now, briefly, this is basically composed of 3 annexes. Annex 1 is about product assessment, and this annex elaborates. And again, this is a recommendation. This isn't the regulation document. This is the recommendation. So about how notified bodies should perform their audits. Annex 1 touches on product assessment, and we feel it elaborates and enforces maybe more clearly the current practices. Again, briefly, Annex 2 talks about quality assessments. It involves the recommendations for performing these conformity assessments. And again, we also feel that it elaborates and maybe provides more clear understanding of the current practices. It gives further advice on outsourcing and the use of subcontractors. And Annex 3 touches upon unannounced audits. Now, I know that will be discussed extensively later with some of the speakers, so I won't go into that. But again, these are new detailed requirements, quite new, quite novel, and maybe quite a challenge for all the stakeholders. And it expands and touches upon the contractual arrangement and obligations between notified bodies and manufacturers in how these unannounced audits will be performed accordingly. So the second document is the actual regulation, and this is a Commission implementing regulation on the designation of notified bodies. So this is mainly what I'll talk on. This document is an EU document, and it depends on many potential stakeholders bearing involvement or providing involvement to allow its potential success. It involves Medical Device Advisory Group Committee, a Medical Device Coordination Group, potentially involve maybe special notified bodies. It may involve an assessment committee for medical devices. So a lot of these stakeholders will involve a lot of planning, coordination and preparation, and there will be representation from member states for all of these groups. The EU Parliament feels that this regulation, they're implying that the proposed regulation has key achievements. They're talking about, this is the EU Parliament perspective, which I'm interpreting as a notified body. They're talking about this new group of bodies, the special notified bodies, whether this is realistic or not, that they will be able to facilitate the assessment of high-risk devices. Obviously, competency will be key, capability and resources to deliver that level of review. This is one of the areas that they feel is going to be of benefit with the regulation as opposed to the existing directive. They also talk about the regulation will provide a tightening up of information. It'll also provide ethical requirements for high-risk devices. They reference diagnostic medical devices used, for example, in pregnancy or DNA testing. So they're feeling that there's more ethical requirements going to be achieved and tightening up of information. And they also reference that there's going to be public access to clinical data for both patients, health professionals, so that everybody knows better how to use a product. So again, they're talking about transparency and more information being available with these proposed regulations. And this is the EU Parliament. They're also talking about the introduction of a patient implant card and registration of patients, so that if any incidents occur, they can be alerted appropriately. A big emphasis from a notified body's perspective is the need to have in-house expertise, in-house competencies, and having those who will be able to meet up-to-date qualification requirements. So training and competency is key. They talk about persons or institutions who wish to reprocess single-use devices to be held liable and to ensure traceability accordingly of these reprocessed devices. And a list of devices unsuitable for reprocessing to be set up via delegated acts. The Parliament says that they feel the key achievements with regard to IVD regulation, that there will be tighter rules for pregnancy tests, diabetes self-tests, etc. Again, this setting up this ethics committee, and they also talk about the benefit of the proposed regulation will deliver the provision of informed consent on patients and genetic counselling. Okay, so again, this is just a brief introduction of what the Parliament feels about. Now let's talk about the implications for notified bodies. And again, this is our perspective. I know Rob and Stephen shared with you some topics that may also be re-delivered here. So there will be new requirements for designation, for competency and monitoring of notified bodies. There will be, notified bodies will need to apply and achieve designation under the new regulation. Their scopes will need to be specific, based on their competency and their in-house expertise. The certificates issued will need to be maintained in a database. As I said earlier, there may be this need for special notified bodies to deal with high-risk innovative devices. There will be a requirement to notify the EU Commission and its MDCG group of these Class 3 new applications. There may need to be a rotation of audit teams. There's concern that the same audit teams doing the same audits, they may get always stale or not as innovative or not as interrogative as what maybe they should have been. So there may be a rotation at less than 3 years per auditor at a particular site, and then bringing new auditors. And the whole issue of unannounced audits. As I said, I won't go into that, that'll be touched upon in more detail later. These are the general implications. In-house expertise, as I said, technical expertise, clinical expertise. My background is clinical, so I'm maybe share with you my thoughts on the clinical review implications. So there would be an expectation that the notified body would have knowledge, clinical knowledge, of understanding the basic anatomical or physiological morbidity, the underlying condition or disease, the application of use of the particular device that's going through the review, going through the CE mark review process. An expectation of technical knowledge, in-house technical knowledge, regard to the relevant device under review as it pertains to its design and the risks associated with its application of use. There will be an expectation that there will be up-to-date, continuous training and knowledge of all directives, standards and MEDEVs. So you may say that's pretty obvious, okay, but there will be a lot of further iterations, we feel, of some of these documents, and therefore the notified bodies would need to be up to date on future iterations accordingly. So training is key. This is a big topic with certain competent authorities, and I know from participation in the CE working group where primarily work with competent authorities. But there is concern that many notified bodies do not attend some of the notified body work groups, the notified body meetings. We have some quarterly in Brussels. So there would need for notified bodies to demonstrate active participation at these meetings, active involvement in the workshops, and participation in what we call the code of conduct, where notified bodies have signed up to an agreement with regard to good practices in their activities for auditing and technical file reviews. So again, a consistency and a harmonisation of notified bodies in pursuing these good practices is expected. As regards to unannounced audits, There will obviously be need for further resources to perform these unannounced audits. And again, unannounced audits will not replace existing annual surveillance audits. These will be on top of the annual surveillance audits. So there will be a demand of notified bodies to have further resources to perform these unannounced audits, and they will have obviously procedures and plans in place. In other words, triggers that would be used by them, be it in performance data, that would justify the need to go and do this unannounced audits. So all of that would expect to be in place. The further, we feel, implications would be that maybe notified bodies may need to have qualified persons in-house. These people would need to have medical device expertise. And indemnification, we touched that this morning. That is obviously going to be a future issue based on the scope, designation of notified bodies and the complexity of the technologies that they review. Obviously the appropriate relevant indemnification would need to be in place to cover that wider high-risk scope based on what we've learned. And of course they need to be viable long-term, because if they're involved in technical file reviews, we feel that some of these reviews are going to take longer, so therefore they obviously have to demonstrate that these notified bodies need to be viable to be there, not just for the end of the review process. Again, these are general implications, nothing, just implications that we feel the pending regulation and the effects they may have on notified bodies. From a clinical perspective, I know this will be touched upon in the afternoon and somewhat early this morning, but again, I would agree with what Rob said. Competency is key. Knowledge in doing literature reviews, that needs to be demonstrated in-house. Knowledge in how to do search methodologies, article reviews. Knowledge in clinical investigation reviews in regard to challenging the design of the study and how the study was performed. Competency in understanding post-market follow-up, Stefan alluded to. Competency in interpreting the data and utilisation of the data in ensuring that the ongoing safety performance of the device is maintained post-CE mark. If there are any triggers there, trends, the notified body would need to have the competency to prompt the appropriate manufacturer if they have concerns with the data while the device is used in the field. So a lot of this competency would probably need to be would need to be in-house, and the expectation is that there would be a need for notified bodies to have clinicians in-house. I know that the MHRA have been very strong on this point, and likewise our notified body in Dublin, the Irish Medicines Board, likewise. So the need for in-house medical expertise is a likelihood. So the expertise will involve being able to identify the risks of the device, assessing the benefit risk analysis for that particular technology, and also our competent authority is very strong on that not alone should you have in-house expertise, but also to have the ability to interpret and challenge when you are using an external end user. So very often with high-risk devices, you would have in-house expertise and you may have an external cardiologist with a drug-eluting stent or any prosthesis that's used in the cardiac arena, but that the notified body would not just take the cardiology opinion up front, rather they would be fully able to understand, obviously, and challenge and provide clarity. That in-house decision making is essential, and qualified staff are obviously appropriate to the en vogue product category. With regard to studies, again I'm talking from clinical, this is my area, the expectation would be that the regulation would seek that there would need to be a clear understanding and scrutinisation behind the appropriate design of the study. Not just the first-in-man pilot or pivotal, there should be clear justification for the appropriate size study design. There should be a clear, robust statistical justification for the sample size. This is something our competent authority is very strong on. Sample size justification for these high-risk devices is very important. So we're trying to demonstrate safety and performance. So the claims that are being made need to substantiate the appropriate sample size. The follow-up timelines of the study, likewise, are very, very important. Obviously, the timelines should follow the trend set by the manufacturer device. Primary endpoints, carefully planned, etc. Again, many of these features are advised in the guidance document, but may not be as aggressively implemented, but we feel they will be going forward. I'm jammed here. I think I'm stuck here. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You had it here. Yeah. It's not consistent with it. Okay, sorry, forgive me. Oh, yeah, sorry. So the implications, so the clear objectives, appropriate patient population, state-of-the-art randomization, again, greater scrutiny and greater degree of delivering and complying with these expectations. This is our impression. Appropriate patient population, randomization, etc. Justification for all of those criteria of clinical study. Okay, 14155, we know that's advised and adhered to accordingly. Again, a greater degree of scrutiny in complying with exactly what it proposes. The MedDev, which is the guidance document, we feel some of the clients may not fully adhere to this guidance document. There may be question marks as to whether the principles of that should be adopted into regulation. So this use of the criteria set up with the MedDev is very, very important. Currently, we're demonstrating safety and performance, where it's about the conformity to the claims of the intended device. Going forward, with the extra clinical demands, there may be a request to demonstrate safety and effectiveness, i.e. including clinical benefit. So that obviously will have a greater emphasis on study numbers and larger study sizes. The technical documentation, so this is my last slide, I'm watching my time. Overall, it elaborates in more detail with regard to the requirements. We feel there will be a great degree of scrutiny. From a technical file perspective, there should be an absolute consistency and a direct relationship between the clinical evaluation report, the content of the clinical evaluation report, the risk management file, and the instructions for use. You may, something simple like that. So there's complete, direct relationship between those three parts of the technical file. For low-risk devices, known and foreseeable clinical risks are identified in the CER, and unforeseen risks are seen in the post-market surveillance. Again, I'm just reiterating that this is something our competent authority is very, very adamant about, this direct relationship going forward. And for high-risk devices, obviously known and foreseeable clinical risks are identified in the CER, in the pre-market arena, and unforeseen risks for high-risk devices will be identified in a post-market clinical follow-up. So, in conclusion, we feel the regulations are more detailed than the existing directive. They elaborate and are more transparent, and they propose from a clinical review perspective a greater degree of scrutiny with regard to what's expected from the MedDev, and likewise with regard to the study design, study follow-ups, the interrelationship between the CER, the risk management and the IFU. And for high-risk devices, spoken earlier on, there will be an expectation. Clinical investigations shall be performed. It will be very difficult to pursue the equivalency route for Class 3 devices. Ultimately, post-market clinical follow-up is going to play a very big part for the Class 2B and 3s, and the use of post-market clinical follow-up data ongoing in the CER to continue to show ongoing safety and performance. The likelihood is that studies will be required for more device technologies. They may be larger in size, and there will be more scrutiny on the quality of the studies with regard to their design, their numbers, their follow-up timelines, and they're obviously a greater degree of competency will be required within notified bodies to be able to challenge those clinical study and clinical data, increased expectations. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, John. A very clear talk on a very unclear topic. Obviously, there's still a lot of things to be addressed and to be clarified. I'd like to open the floor for the discussions. I think my neighbor has the first question.
Yeah. You talked about reassessment of notified bodies. Does it mean there will be a shakeout of notified bodies because the requirement for notified bodies will increase? We have now about 80, close to 80 notified bodies. There are a lot of customers here with maybe not in the top 10 notified bodies list. So if the shakeout will and his notified body will not apply and will be certified according to new regulation, doesn't mean he has a shock now already for a new notified body which is not really addressed already. I think it's like a domino effect. What will happen is that when the notified body falls, the related customers with the not-for body are also lost in the game, and especially for small and mid-sized companies. It's a long question, but I know there are a lot of clients also here which are not with BSIs and NCIs, but with the small. And it's quite a concern for me what will bring for that industry. It's a long question. But
no, it's a very valid question. But I mean, maybe Rob can help you with providing some guidance also. But I'm only giving what our implications are from us as being a notified body, where we feel our expectations are going, and that is primarily driven by the expectations of our competent authority. So we've had to increase our in-house competencies further in certain technical areas. In the clinical area as well, we've added more people. In the technical area with regard to biomechanical implants, etc. So we have been building that resource capability over the past 18 months because we've been prompted and we've had tough audits to prompt us at this. And again, this is only potential. So it's a difficult question to fully answer. I can only speak for what is expected of us. We have a scope designation that covers high-risk devices, medium-risk devices, and low-risk devices. So we've had to customize our competencies to meet that scope. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So
but for small notified bodies, there are small companies authorities of those notified bodies with 2 or 3 persons.
Yes.
And already have a scope which may be too large for them. That's clear.
Yes.
But they granted a CE mark on the market, and now they will be scrutinized.
Well, the likelihood is that they will be scrutinized. I mean, I can't speak for their size and their company. Maybe Rob can add to that, but I can only speak for our experience.
Following the PIP implant scandal, there was a DALI proposal. The Commissioner DALI put in some proposals. One of those was from January 2013, there will be joint audits of notified bodies. So from January 2013 until now, there's been about 16 audits, these joint audits. The joint audits consist of a member of the Commission, which is a member of the Food and Veterinary Office, and representatives of 2 other member states. So to date, there's been 16 joint audits, and some of those audits have identified problems both with notified bodies and with the designating authorities who have been actually carrying out these assessments. And just to confirm, I can assure you that quite stringent measures have been taken against those notified bodies and designating authorities who failed to live up to expectations. So all I can say, I can't obviously release any details, but there has been quite stringent actions taken against notified bodies and designating authorities who haven't come up to scratch. I can also confirm that there's an implementing regulator. That was a voluntary scheme, so basically that was voluntary, but now, I think it was in mid-September, there was an implementing regulation which was put into force, which means that every single notified body will have to be redesignated within a 3-year period. So that will include audits again from the Food and Veterinary Office and representatives of 2 other member states. So every notified body within Europe is going to be redesignated within 3 years. And this is before the proposed regulations come in. So this is over and above the requirements. And basically, with the competence of the Food and Veterinary Offices, we're quite happy with the work that they're doing, and hopefully this will drive forward the improvement in performance of the European notified bodies.
And after redesignation, do you expect customers to be forced to move from one body to another?
I'm pretty sure that there will be some notified bodies who fail to meet the redesignation criteria, and then yes, manufacturers will have to transfer to other notified bodies. That's absolutely clear. There's already been quite a lot of activity.
Yes, there is.
All right, let's move on to the next question. Gentleman in the middle.
Just one experience from TOV product service. So we had already in the past notified bodies that were then kicked out by regulatory agencies, and already now a lot of customers at the moment are switching from the small notified bodies, searching for other solutions, because in those cases also clinical data may be affected, and the one that is quite common, which was closed down, has a secondary consequence that when those products were transferred to the other notified bodies, the clinical data had really bad quality. And now those customers are struggling on the market because normally the notified body had to reject, but because of rollover rules, they had to overtake them, and at the same time the regulatory agencies are acting against those notified bodies who took those products, even though they should not be on the market. So it's a quite complex situation at the moment. I think there is no general answer to it, but typically the notified bodies will die out if you follow this example that you've seen on the market. Those which have not the competence.
Thank you.
That's the train of thought that we have. Likewise, competency is key, and competency to comply with your existing scope designation. There may be some instances where notified bodies may have to park or abandon certain technologies or scope or lower their involvement with high-risk devices. But yeah, that is what we feel is happening and going to happen.
Okay. I would like to allow for 2 brief questions and brief answers.
Quite brief. If the competent authority is responsible for the oversight of the notified body, and the notified body is denotified, is then the competent authority liable for all the costs by the manufacturer?
Excellent question. I think you should be addressing that to Rob. That's perfect. Thank you for asking that question.
You wanted a short answer, the answer is no.
I doubt it.
That's the best question asked today.
Okay, and then the final question, and once again, please a brief answer.
No, just confirmation. I was honored to host the second of those joint audits. It was in February. It was the first one in Germany. And just to confirm, I think mainly what Rob Hagen said, what it has done to us, because we've had a follow-up in closeout of non-conformities, is mainly the increased emphasis on the clinical evaluation, equivalence, under what conditions do we really allow equivalence. That's the main area where we've increased our scrutiny. So that confirms mainly what Rob said. That's the number one area of change as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, likewise, equivalency is a hot topic with our competent authority and has been for the past few years, or the ability to be able to demonstrate equivalency for high-risk device. The expectation is to have unique clinical investigation.
Okay, thank you. I think we had an excellent start with a very interesting perspective from 3 sides. I would like to ask you to give our speakers a big hand for an excellent start of the meeting. It's now time for a coffee break. We're running a few minutes late, but I still would like to have you back at 11. Please drink your coffee, but also try and spend some time with the sponsors who are downstairs, and see you at 11.